It's a me.
It's
Mario.
So this story messed you up, huh?
Yeah, it did. It
Oh,
was
by the way, if
emotionally
anyone's watching
devastating.
this on YouTube, apologies for this setup. We just thought it'd be fun. We thought it would
It
be
is
fun.
It is fun.
It is
It's
fun.
funny, and you're gonna laugh at it.
It's a hoot and a handshake. So this story messed you up.
It did.
In what way?
Emotionally.
Yeah? Bothered you?
Yeah, it did.
I read this story on an exercise bike at the gym originally, and it didn't mess me up that much, but I understand why it would.
I read this story after eating some crackers and cheese.
Oh, well, that makes more sense now. It's a real...
It was also thunderstorming out when I read this story.
Yeah, we had a pretty good fall of rain here not too long back.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, this is it, folks. This is it. This is the final story in not only, whatever this section's called, A Fabulous Formless Darkness. I just gestured behind me, even though it's just a fake. If I move my hand, you can kind of see stuff behind me. You can see my cat. If you're listening to this, Willow and I have a virtual background on. That's totally screwing everything up. No, this is the final story, not only in The Fabulous Formless Darkness, but in The Dark Descent altogether. This is it. It does not go beyond this until you get to his next collection of short stories.
It's not a collection of short stories. It's a collection of novellas.
Novellas, that's right. This is it. David G. Hartwell decided to close out The Dark Descent with this week's story. And
the story that messed me up the most out of all of the ones that we've read.
Crazy that I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's very existential, but also I found it kind of fitting because we kicked off this book with Stephen King, who's probably I'm comfortable saying the most famous living horror author in the world.
Yeah.
But with a story of his that we had trouble stretching into the definition of horror with The Reach. Like, I was like, what a surprising story.
Also a very existential story.
But a shocking story to begin a collection that was supposed to be kind of an overview of horror, like an overview of modern horror, basically, from the late 1800s till now. But it made you think, and it really challenged the definition of horror. And I think it's very telling that we end this book with one of the most famous science fiction writers of all time, not horror writers, with a story that I feel really challenges the definition of horror, in that it contains no ghosts or goblins, no ghouls, the violence is implied. It's mostly just a bunch of conversations and incident, and nothing that on its own is scary, yet it is a horrific concept and ordeal.
I mean, I disagree that nothing in it on its own is scary. I think there's a lot of elements of this story that on its own are pretty terrifying.
But this is a story of not only horror, not only time travel, but of mental health, anxiety about existence.
And literally my worst fear in the world, which is endless loops.
Oh, I thought you were going to say being in a parade.
Well, that too. No, endless loops are one of my greatest fears. It always really upsets me whenever I see them in any kind of fiction.
Well, let's not keep the audience in suspense any longer. Willow, what is the last story in The Dark Descent?
A Little Something for Us Tempunauts by Philip K. Dick.
Philip K. Dick, PKD. Are you down with PKD? Say it.
I mean, I feel like I've read...
you didn't respond correctly. I say, you down with PKD? And you say...
Yes?
You say, yeah, you know me. You down with PKD?
Yeah, you know me.
The absolute worst, ladies and gentlemen. We are of different generations. It is clear. No, what is our illustrious editor? What does the late great David G. Hartwell have to say about Mr. Dick, Mr. Philip K. Dick story? Why is this here? I mean, it's written right there. There should be a paragraph.
He's rarely discussed as a horror writer of great powers and achievement, worthy of a place besides Robert Aickman, and at the same time a legitimate heir of Robert W. Chambers and Ambrose Bierce. Science fiction has a long tradition of stories that question the nature of reality, but none is more disturbing than A Little Something for Us Tempunauts.
It is a distressing tale.
Yeah, he basically goes to say that these like types of works have to like go on to stretch the meaning of like the definition of horror, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, basically you're just like, what you think you know about horror, throw out the window, because despite these maybe not fitting those criteria, they are truly horrific tales.
Yes, which is fitting, I think, to end the collection with a story that may not fit most people's definitions of horror.
And I think it raises a good point, especially in like the genre of horror, where the rules of literature kind of have to be put to the side sometimes in order to just really accept that sometimes the genre of horror is less about the rules and more about the effects that it has on the reader.
And sometimes it's less of a genre and more just like a milieu. Like it's really hard to say that horror is a genre at times. Because I mean, you can.
It's so expansive.
Yeah, you can have Western horror, you can have romantic horror, funny horror,
you can have fantasy horror,
not scary horror, but it's still horror. Like you know,
yeah.
If a mummy is in your story, it's sort of horror, even if it's a funny mummy or a fruity yummy mummy. It's still a horror tale. Like I think I always ask the question: Is A Nightmare Before Christmas horror? It's got mummies and vampires and witches and skeleton men.
It's also terrifying.
Well, it is terrifying. So what can you tell me? What can you personally tell me about Philip K. Dick? What you know about the man himself?
Not much. The only other I probably know more than I think I do. I just don't do names very well. But the only thing I can think of is that he's mentioned in this book, The Hollow Places. Yes. And I was like, oh, hey, that's that guy whose story I have to read.
So Philip K. Dick was born in 1928. He died in 1982. He was a science fiction writer. He wrote a lot of dystopian fiction. His writing went through several major phases that could be completely tracked to his relationships and his mental health decline. He wrote over 40 novels, over 120 short stories, which examined the nature's reality, identity, human consciousness, often featuring ordinary characters confronted by extraordinary technological and psychic environments. For example, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? A Scanner Darkly?
Oh, yeah.
The Man in the High Castle. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale.
Yeah, okay.
So he likes to explore the human condition and question the real versus the simulated. It was one of his big things. And then he died at the age of 53, and his stuff continued to be published well after his death. Like, people just started picking over what he left behind and publishing stuff as well. Now, when I say that there's a connection between his mental health and his marriages and his writing, where is it? Let's see. So, finding it right here. So, you have his early career, which was like the 50s through sort of the 60s. He was married to Cleo Apostolides, and then to Anne Williams Rubinstein. He was very poor. At times, he was literally eating dog food. And he had to support his family. So he just kept writing science fiction stories, never thinking he was going to be successful, but just knowing this was a way to put food on the plate. Had a lot of problems in his marriage, already had mental health stuff going on. In the 1960s to 70s, he started getting famous. He wrote the novel The Man in the High Castle, won the Hugo Award for it. He was married to Nancy Hackett and then to Leslie Tessa Busby during this time. And his mental health issues started amplifying.
As often happens when one gets famous.
This is around the time people are saying this is kind of the peak of his writing output, like his best stuff. This is when he put out Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and a lot of the short stories people remember him for. He also started doing a lot of drugs, exploring the nature of reality and altered states. And then in his late career, the 1970s, through his death, he started delving into theology, philosophy, the nature of reality. He divorced Tessa, and he had an experience called the 2374 experience, when in February of 1974, after undergoing dental surgery and being administered sodium pentothal, he began experiencing frequent hallucinations and mystical visions. A delivery woman wearing a fish-shaped pendant came to deliver medication to him. He saw the fish-shaped pendant, figured she was a messenger from God. Sunlight reflected off the pendant and a pink beam shot into his eyes which he experienced and perceived as God beaming information into his mind. He got a revelation that there was a health problem with his son, so he took his son to the doctor for tests, and the tests were conclusive that he had a hernia that needed immediate medical attention. Dick saw this as proof that he was touched by God and one of God's messengers. This is when he started writing his exegesis, which is, I mean, I own the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, the published version. It's like this thick, and that's just part of it. He wrote the Velas trilogy. He wrote the trans I can't even think of the word of Timothy Archer. His stuff became very autobiographical, very mystical. He firmly believed he was a messenger from God. And then he died in the middle of production of Blade Runner, so he never even really got to see that. He died thinking he was a failure with mental health, or not with mental health issues, but never thinking, I mean, not really understanding that a lot of his mental health stuff was most likely paranoid schizophrenia. He thought that he was being tracked by government agents. The transmigration of Timothy Archer is the book I was trying to think of. But a lot of people consider his post, like, pink beam into the eye writing output to kind of fall away, like, it not be his strongest stuff, with the exception of A Little Something for Us Tempunauts as one of the primary examples of his still quality output that he was able to write and put out, even though Philip K. Dick firmly believed there was no such thing as time, and that we were constantly living a loop of time over and over and over again in perpetuity. So that's just one of the things that he may have slipped into this story.
May have. What do you mean may have?
Yeah. This story came out in 1974. It was first published in The Final Stage, the Ultimate Science Fiction Anthology. Then it was in the Year's Best Science Fiction, Volume 4, and it's been in million collections ever since. So that's it. That's a little bit of background as to what was going on in PKD's mind. What is this story? What is A Little Something for Us Tempunauts?
So the basic premise of the story is there's three men who have seemingly come from the past into about a week in the future, when they're dead, supposedly, when they've died.
Yes.
They're called Tempunauts. They were attempting to go 100 years into the future, but something went horrifically wrong and caused an implosion on re-entry, and they all died. And somehow they've ended up, instead of 100 years in the future, only a week in the future. And they're trying to figure out what went wrong, and one of them believes that they're stuck in a time loop. Addison Doug, who this story is sort of centered on him, and his girlfriend,
right,
kind of, Mary Lou, who they have the initial meeting at her house because I don't know why she's allowed to be there. I don't understand.
Yeah,
she is, so
everyone is aware of this too. Like the American public is aware that these three guys have gone into the future and have died. And like we know that everyone knows that they exploded or imploded on re-entry. But
that's because they've witnessed it. Like there's like news articles.
Like, because they're basically astronauts just with time travel. They're American heroes.
They're Tempunauts.
Yes.
And they're trying to beat the Russians.
Even though they are partnering with the Russians, because Russians were involved in this too. Yeah,
that's kind of how space stuff seems to be at this point.
Yes.
Everyone's competing with each other, even though they're all working together.
Yeah, we're still in the midst of a bit of a space race historically, and I mean, we'll get to it when we discuss the story, but a lot of this has to do with the way Philip K. Dick was feeling about the space program and how we were just kind of getting sick of it. Like the excitement was gone, and how we turned these men into national heroes despite, like, they sort of have to become heroes. Like, that is your job when you are an astronaut, is you are now a hero, regardless of whether you were successful, who you are. Like, Philip K. Dick was very disillusioned with everything at this point. So the space program was just part of that, but also
the premise is basically they're like, people are gonna find out that we're here and we have to make it good because it's not good because we failed in our mission, but we have to make it seem like this was intentional. Like, we came back here because we for some reason knew about the events in the future and we wanted to see everything, and we have to give the public something to work with.
Yes.
And Addison is basically like, I don't want to do this anymore. We've done this 100,000 times. I just want it to be over.
And it's not a Groundhog Day thing. It's not that he remembers doing it. It's a feeling of like a malaise that's settled in. Like, oh God, this just feels so familiar. Which is also that thing where it's very much the signs of depression.
Yeah.
Like, this sense that nothing has any point, that there is no reason to keep doing things, and that of like the sort of paranoia of like, I'm the only one who understands what's going on in the world. There is a lot of parallels between this and a person's deteriorating mental health. Up to and including, if I gotta go, I'm taking everyone with me.
Yeah. Because he seems to have some like understanding of the things that people are going to say. But that's also sort of like, he observes things from people before talking to them that could, like, he makes a guess and it's correct.
Yeah.
Which, parallels to Philip K. Dick now that we know more about his life. And he gives, there's like a lot of conversation that happens. There's another guy named General Toad who's kind of like the we've talked a bit about this before in the military versus scientist like in horror or science fiction.
Yeah.
There's General Toad and there's a Dr. something. Dr. Fane. And they're not necessarily at odds. I think if this was a expanded story, we would see more conflict between those two.
Yeah. This is but the military and science are also two fields that Dick didn't have a whole lot of faith in at this point. Like, so neither of them are being set up as the good guys here. It's mostly about public perception for them.
Yeah. They have a whole script planned out and they're like, this is what you're going to say in response to these questions, blah, 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 blah. And the interview eventually does come up and they're not supposed to be interviewed at this point. But Addison basically stands up and is like, here's what's happening.
Yeah.
Guess what? Here's what's happening.
Right, because there's a big parade.
That's like a big funeral procession, kind of.
Right, it's a funeral parade that's also a celebration of their accomplishments. And the idea is that they're going to materialize or just appear in this parade on a float. And people are going to freak out and they're going to explain to the public what we're seeing is the projection into the future of the three guys before they died. And and so everyone has a script, like all the reporters and everyone, that they're supposed to follow. And it is Addison who goes off script and is like, we're all stuck in a time loop.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, all right.
Great. But because of what he says, basically the public sort of shifts to his side of the situation.
Yeah.
Which is basically, they discovered that for some reason the weight of cargo upon reentry was 100 pounds heavier than it was supposed to be. And Addison is like, that was probably me, right? And the people in charge are like, yeah, it was you. We don't know why. And so he's like, well, maybe it's the way to get out of this time loop. Maybe we all have to die. And so for some reason, his like heartfelt, not even really heartfelt, his just depressed like explanation of what's going on makes people shift to see, like, to be on his side of the situation. And the scientists and the military are like, I mean, we've been given the orders to let you guys make this decision, I guess, even though we don't know what's going on. Are you sure you want this? Like, are you like, this is a terrible idea?
Yeah.
And Addison's like, yeah, actually, no, I want my girlfriend to be involved in the decision.
Yeah.
And they're like, fine, I guess, fine, go ahead.
She gets the car parts, like, it's car parts. It's 100 pounds of Volkswagen parts.
Yeah.
Which is like just the first heavy thing they could get their hands on.
The other two people are Benz and Crane. And Crane is not down with this.
Yeah, so what we're dealing with here is we're already in the midst of a loop because regardless, they have already imploded from the 100 extra pounds. And he says the 100 extra pounds are the key to us getting out of this time loop. But they've already done sense. They've already done that. What you learn, however, of course, is that he's intentionally causing the time loop.
He gets a call from the doctor and the general, and they're like, we've figured out that the way to actually, like, you are in a time loop, yes. The way to break it is to not do this. The way to break it is to not do this. It's to do your best to, like, survive, because what you're doing is actually the thing causing the time loop.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. And they're like, can we talk to the others, please? And he's like, nope, bye.
Yeah.
And that's the part that effed me up.
In what way?
What do you mean? I was like, because we go through this story thinking that, like, this is the guy who knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we go through this story like, okay, yeah, like, his points, when you're reading them straight up without, like, just straight through the story, they make sense. It's that thing where you look back and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why would that make any sense? But when you're reading it, he's making the argument so well that you're like, okay, yeah, nodding along, like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like, he's clearly exhausted. We should just, like, listen to this guy. But then you get to that part and you're like, oh, wait, no, they're right. What he's doing doesn't make any sense. And it's just devastating to know that he's intentionally hurting all of these people over and over and over again, and just compounding the issue because he's just getting more and more exhausted each time.
Yeah.
And the ending of the story is, I think, heart-wrenching. This was his gift to them, the people, his country. He had bestowed upon the world a wonderful burden, the dreadful and weary miracle of eternal life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This story is really well done.
Yeah. Yes. It's a tricky little story. It's not very long. Mm-hmm. But it encompasses so many of Philip K. Dick's ideas, his philosophies, his beliefs in himself. The fact that he sort of either considered himself to be a god or to be cursed by a god. There's also the whole thing where, like, Philip K. Dick believed that, like, gods were driven insane by eternal life. Like, there's just this...
Most things probably would be.
There's this whole thing, right. And what we're seeing in this story isn't people being driven insane, per se. It's just people being driven into depression by...
This story reminds me of something you brought up in your stage show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. There's a part in it where he's talking about how, like, they have this, like, certainty in their death, just like cancer patients do or whatever, mm-hmm. and how that's, like, a small comfort. And I feel like this isn't just a story about, like, depression, but it's also about, like, anxiety. Like, he's found himself in a situation where he knows exactly what is going to happen, exactly what is going to, like, come from the worst case scenario, and he doesn't know what's going to happen if he saves it. Like, he doesn't know the outcome. Like, maybe they do go 100 years in the future. It's almost a sort of, like, it feels like what somebody with such bad, like, anxiety about the future would do to avoid a potential outcome that could be worse, it could be better. They don't know, so they're just stuck in this loop and intentionally putting themselves in this loop of just acceptable misery.
Yeah.
So they don't have to deal with what might happen.
Right. And that to you is like the supreme horror?
The supreme horror to me is being stuck in a loop. That's the supreme horror to me. I've had 2 nightmares in the past few months. One about you and one about my mom.
Wow.
And they're both terrifying, and I woke up, like, on the verge of a panic attack. Like, it's loops to me, especially loops you are aware of and cannot get out of, fill me with such panic.
Yeah.
It always has. It's always like that. It's why things like the back rooms scare me so much.
Right.
Or, like, just endless cycles, like PT. Like, that is terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything. You're just stuck in this loop, and there's nothing happening, but it's mad.
I mean, yeah. Like, it's funny because, you know, I read this story and I was okay with it at first. Mm-hmm. Like, I was like, all right, I get it. I get what he did. I get what he was going for. It sat with me, though. Like, I sort of, like, had to dwell in it for a while and then read, like, sort of a bit more about it and kind of feel it out. And it's one of those stories that it didn't mess me up. But I appreciated it being in this collection and being the end story, because also the fact that it's a collection of horror stories from a wide swath of time that doesn't follow a chronological like order. It follows a thematic order, but even within those themes, they seem kind of all over the place. That begins with a story about death and ends with a story about the perpetual looping of time. I don't know, there's just something thematically appropriate that like it just everything kind of exists at the same time. And that's kind of how you're supposed to see this book. Not really like a progression of horror, but like, here's an overview that if you take a step back and look at it, you get a pretty good, minus contributions from women and minorities.
Yeah.
You get a pretty good overview of like popular horror fiction of the last like 100 plus odd years.
Yeah. I think another thing about this story that reminded me of your stage show a bit, I don't know why that was on my mind, but it was when you talked about your fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
This story felt a lot like somebody who was terrified of dying and now has the opportunity to experience what dying is without having to experience what dying is.
Yeah.
And is just finding endless comfort in that, but also endless like misery. I think it hit me so hard because it reminded me of how I was emotionally when I was incredibly depressed and anxious all the time.
Yeah.
Like I was consistently choosing to remain miserable because it was safe. And the idea of having to step outside of that sort of contained loop and figure out how to save myself was scary.
Yeah.
And it was easier not to.
So final thoughts on the story.
It was awesome. It was a really good story. It hurt a lot to read though.
Yeah.
It was really hard. I mean, it deals with one of my greatest fears of all time, and B, just like mental health stuff that I can like relate to.
Yeah. Distressing.
Mm-hmm.
Upsetting. Genuinely upsetting.
It is upsetting. Yeah.
Yes.
But not upsetting in the way that like what was the story that I was really upset by that I didn't realize I was upset by?
I don't even remember now.
Was it The Asian Shore? Yeah.
Yes.
It's not upsetting the way The Asian Shore or Rosemary's Baby was upsetting, where I didn't realize it was upsetting, and then later on I was like, oh, that was upsetting. It's upsetting in the way that like I can process.
Yeah. Upsetting in the way that the author probably intended it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Upsetting.
Yeah.
Can you believe that we are done with The Dark Descent?
No.
Can you comprehend that?
Nope.
Now, I said to you off mic last week, I think, or maybe the week before, that all this time we've been doing The Dark Descent, years and years now, and we've never really discussed David G. Hartwell.
We haven't.
Who he is or was at this point. When we started this podcast, David G. Hartwell was still alive. He died in 2017. And I read so his wife at the time, they were in the process of splitting up when he died.
Yeah.
Which just makes everything a lot more horrible and hard for everyone to deal with. She wrote on her blog a piece called Till Death Did Us Part. And it starts off with her saying, I just awoke from this horrible, her name's Catherine Kramer. I just awoke from this horrible dream that David Hartwell, my husband, had fallen down the stairs and died. And now that I am fully awake, it is still true. And I am still a widow. It all happened, so she wrote this just, I think, a day or two after he died. But he had fallen down the stairs. There was a crash. There was some kind of accident a few days before that kind of like freaked them all out. He was trying to help her with some computer stuff. And she says, 14 years ago, when Peleg, our favorite cat, had a stroke and died abruptly on the basement floor, when David and our then young son Peter were out running errands, our other cat, who had seen the corpse, spent all day frantically searching for him. I feel like that now. His car is in my driveway, his books are in my basement, his jacket is over one of my dining room chairs, his glasses and cell phone are on my coffee table. There's a paper bag from the wine store next to the mail on the table, containing the ginger brandy he just brought for our trip down to the city to take Liz to see the Night Vale live show this weekend. The brandy is a bribe for me, so I will sit and talk with him. He's here. He's got to be here. There are arcing skid marks from his hiking boots on the wood-paneled wall of my staircase. His blood is on the steps. There is a brown stain on the blue carpet at the bottom of the steps. There are unfamiliar bits of debris, Velcro things, left behind by the EMTs. He is not here. He will never be here again. This is impossible. It makes no sense. And she ends it by saying, an artery in his brain had blown out, causing a massive brain bleed. He never regained consciousness. The glass of the door didn't break. While I was at the hospital yesterday signing dreadful papers, Heather and her husband Jason and the kids took down the Christmas tree. Heather washed all the dishes. David, the living room is all clean and vacuumed. You can come home now. Please, come home. We miss you. And I read this. It's like a 5-minute read. I just looking for information on David Hartwell as a person. And I was like, I think that's really all I needed to know, is just how much he was missed by the people who loved him. And I kind of feel bad I never got to talk to him. Yeah, that's David. I think those words are just David G. Hartwell. He seemed like a pretty cool guy. I mean, their relationship seemed to be falling apart, but he seemed to be doing, he seemed like a pretty nice guy.
Yeah, sorry, I'm choked up.
Yeah, he was 74 years old. He was consulting editor at Tor Forge in the early 80s. He was the senior editor there when he died. He was nominated more than 40 times for Hugos. He published hundreds of books: Philip K. Dick's The Divine Invasion, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, Radio Free Albemuth, as well as the novels in Mr. Herbert's Dune Saga and Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun series. He compiled dozens of anthologies, many with his wife, with Ms. Kramer. The Space Opera Renaissance, Spirits of Christmas, 21 Otherworldly Tales, and he wrote Age of Wonders, exploring the world of science fiction. He championed genre fiction long before crossover hits like Lord of the Rings films, Game of Thrones, and The Walking Dead. George R.R. Martin was edited by David Hartwell. Miss George Martin wrote, Tor's long track record as the preeminent publisher of science fiction and fantasy in the United States is based in no small part on Mr. Hartwell's work. He had a master's degree in English literature from Colgate University and a doctorate in comparative medieval literature from Columbia. He has a son and a daughter. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters that he left behind when he died. And yeah, that's David G. Hartwell. That's the man who gave us this collection that we just spent so much of our life talking about.
Yeah.
I know. Wish we could have gotten him on the show. Of course, we didn't start doing these stories until COVID hit, after he died. So, he died in, looks like, January of 2016. So, so we missed out on that. I guess we'd only been doing the show for less than a year when he died. So we didn't even know we were going to, I hadn't even given you this book yet.
I have 2 copies of this book.
You have 2 copies of this book?
Yeah, because Matt gave me a copy of it a couple of years after you did.
Well, it's good because now you can read it twice.
Yeah, that was, wow. I'm sorry, I just...
Well, it's a good thing then that our next episode is going to be a
comedy.
A palate cleanser in which we don't think about death at all. What's it about again?
Death.
A guy who dies.
A guy who dies.
Willow, what is the exciting announcement about our next episode?
It's a movie. It's a movie about the law system of heaven? ?
We're going to find out. What is this, our 4th time to try to watch this thing?
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will succeed.
We will, if it kills us. If we have to watch this movie from heaven, well, we're not going to heaven. If we have to watch this movie from hell.
I'm looking. I had my copy of it.
There's a strange artifact that is appearing on your skin while you are doing that.
What is it?
It looks like, you'll see it in the recording. It's wild.
Found it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Found it. It's...
Defending your life.
Look, so it's impossible. We have this stupid background thing on. I can't hold up objects because it doesn't accept them as a human being. It cuts everything.
It makes you disappear.
It makes me disappear. Defending Your Life. Albert Brooks's Defending Your Life is our upcoming movie as we get back into the ecstasy of influence. Can you believe it?
Let's go.
We're
back. The whole reason this podcast exists.
movies.
I'm doing my arm things.
Yep.
I don't know what
you
this
can't
is.
Tell. I think this will be the last time we record with this on.
I disagree.
Discombobulating for me.
I completely disagree. I think we're going to record with this on every time.
Can you make your own? Maybe we can make our own.
Probably.
Maybe we should do.
It's hilarious. I still think we should have our next movie be playing on the movie screen projector.
I was just going to say that.
Seats.
As our heads disappear because the thing can't detect our faces
anymore.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, I don't know why you'd watch this on YouTube. A fake kitchen background and a couple
because it's hilarious. Also, you get to see the amazing faces I make while he talks.
But you don't get to see our amazing rooms.
No one wants to see my room. Oh,
amazing rooms. What is there, like filthy underwear all over the place? I mean, yes, but that's not why you're upset. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for listening. Next time you hear from us, we will be watching a movie by Albert Brooks, Defending Your Life. I'm Phil. Wait a minute. You know what we never did? We never introduced the show.
That's what I was saying. It's a me, Maria. That was our intro, right?
Yeah, that's how we introduced the show. Well, I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And it's Del Toro time.
It's and also not Del Toro time anymore. Bye.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when it's Del Toro time.
Del Toro time.
Yes, we had to do the intro.
Mario.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.